There are silences that hurt more than screams. Martha knew this every night when the rain hit the roof of that house empty for 3 years. Her hands, cracked from work and tears, no longer expected to touch his again. Until one day, amid the golden dust of the festival, her little Clara pointed to a stranger and whispered, that hat belonged to my father." And in those blue eyes, worn like old leather, Martha saw again a reflection of the life she thought lost forever. If this story has touched your heart, give me a like as one leaves flowers on a cherished memory, and tell me in the comments, how do you think this encounter between past and present will end? Your story deserves to be heard too. In the golden stillness of dusk, when the sun poured its last light over Golden Valley, dust danced like tiny spirits among the dry paths of the town. The Riders' Festival gathered people from all around. Worn hats bowed in reverence to the setting sun, while leather creaked to the rhythm of tired steps. The artisans' stalls formed a labyrinth of muted colors, where leather straps hung like sleeping snakes, and the bells of horses sang forgotten melodies. In the distance, a bagpipe wept notes that smelled of nostalgia. Clara Bell watched everything from a distance, her brown eyes attentive to every detail. At 8 years old, the world seemed to her an immense canvas, painted with colors only she could name. Her small fingers played with the hem of her worn blue dress, while the wind caressed her dark hair, sprinkled with the dust of the road. Today is the day, she told herself. She had dreamed it 3 nights in a row. Martha, her mother, was busy selling cornbread at one of the stalls. Clara took this moment to slip through the crowd. Her feet knew the way, though her eyes had never seen it. Something was calling her, as if an invisible thread pulled at her heart. That's when she saw him. A man sitting in the farthest corner of the square with a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows over his face, weathered by the sun. He drank coffee from an iron cup, and his eyes, fixed on some point on the horizon, seemed to be searching for something lost long ago. Clara stopped, feeling the air thicken around her. This man had appeared in her dreams, but it wasn't him who mattered, but what he wore on his head, a worn leather hat with a crescent-shaped scar on the top. With her heart beating like a small caged bird, Clara advanced until she stood before him. Their shadows met before their gazes. "That hat," she whispered in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. "That hat belonged to my father." The world seemed to stop. The coffee escaped from the stranger's hand, and the cup fell, spilling a dark puddle on the thirsty earth. His eyes, blue like a sky washed by rain, fixed on Clara's with a mixture of astonishment and terror. He said nothing. There was no need. In that silence loaded with questions, an invisible bond had begun to form. Martha and Clara's small cabin stood solitary at the northern edge of Golden Valley, where wheat fields whispered secrets to the wind. It was a humble but dignified place, with wooden walls that had endured 3 winters without Jacob's presence, Clara's father. Martha had learned to survive like desert plants, absorbing every drop of hope, transforming pain into strength. Her hands, once soft as petals, were now calloused from constant work. She sewed clothes for the town's families, baked bread she sold at the market, and every afternoon when the sun began to set, she collected medicinal herbs on the nearby hill. Clara watched her mother through the window while drawing in a small notebook with yellowed pages. She traced lines that formed faces, always the same, a man with a hat smiling under a sun that never set. "What are you drawing, my little star?" asked Martha as she entered, placing her basket of herbs on the wooden table. "Dad," Clara replied, without lifting her gaze from the paper. "And the man who has his hat." Martha stood motionless, as if her daughter's words were stones that struck her. "What man, Clara?" Her voice sounded like a rope about to break. "The one from the festival. The one who just arrived. He has sad eyes like the sky before it rains." Martha sat slowly next to her daughter, words caught in her throat like thorns. Jacob had disappeared 3 years ago, leaving behind debts and unanswered questions. His hat, the one that had belonged to his own father, was the only thing that should have remained. How could it now be on a stranger's head? "Are you sure it was his hat?" Martha asked, stroking Clara's hair. "It had the moon mark," the girl replied, drawing a crescent on the top of the hat in her drawing. "Dad told me he cut it when riding under the stars, the night before I was born." Martha closed her eyes. She remembered that story. Jacob used to tell it while cradling Clara, saying that wound on the hat was a blessing, for it had brought him his little star. That night Clara dreamed of golden fields and a man who had no face, only a hat with a moon mark. In the dream, the man extended his hand to her, but she could never reach it. Eli McRae arrived at the Peterson Ranch a week after the festival. Old Peterson needed help with the cattle and the fences that winter had damaged. Eli was a man of few words, but his hands spoke for him. They knew how to calm a nervous horse, how to repair a broken fence, how to shape red-hot metal in the forge. Every morning, Clara would sneak to the edge of the Peterson property and observe the stranger from a distance. She counted his steps, memorized his gestures, and at night she would draw them in her notebook with a piece of charcoal. One day, while the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Clara gathered her courage. She left a drawing on a stone, right at the boundary between the properties. 3 figures under a tree, a man, a woman, and a girl all holding hands. In the lower corner she had written in unsure letters, "For the man with the moon hat." The next day the drawing was gone. In its place was a small figure carved in wood, a horse with its front legs raised, as if about to leap toward the sky. Thus began a silent exchange. Each day Clara would leave a different drawing: the house where they lived, the stream where they washed clothes, the old oak where her father used to sit and play the harmonica. And each day, at dawn, she would find something new: a dried flower pressed between 2 flat stones, a whistle carved from bone, a hawk feather tied with a red thread. No one in town knew that the silent Eli McRae kept each drawing in a wooden box he kept under his cot. No one knew that at night, by the light of an almost consumed candle, he traced Clara's drawings with his calloused fingers, as if reading a secret language. And no one, except Grandma June, had noticed how Martha's eyes discreetly followed Eli's figure when they coincided at the market, or how her cheeks tinged with a soft pink when he greeted her by touching the brim of his hat, that hat that held so many secrets. Grandma June was the strong trunk that supported the fragile branches of that broken family. With her 70 years behind her, and a knowledge of the world that came from having survived 2 husbands and a war, she was the voice of wisdom in Golden Valley. She lived in a small house adjacent to Martha and Clara's, surrounded by medicinal plants and books that no one else in town could read. "The past is like a buried seed, my child," she told Clara one afternoon while teaching her to make bread. "It can remain dormant for years, but when the right rain comes, it germinates." Clara kneaded with her small hands, feeling the texture of the flour between her fingers. "And is Mr. Eli the rain, Grandma?" June looked at her granddaughter with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Children, she thought. See what? Adults pretend to hide. Perhaps. Or perhaps he's another seed that has been waiting for its moment to grow. Clara nodded, as if she perfectly understood her grandmother's metaphorical language. There was something about Eli McRae that made her feel safe, as if she had known him forever. It wasn't just the hat, it was the way his eyes softened when he saw her from afar, or how his hands, large and rough, became delicate when carving figures for her. "Mom is still waiting for Dad, isn't she?" asked Clara, shaping the dough into small circles. Grandma June sighed, and the sound was like the wind through dry branches. "Your mother keeps her heart under lock and key since Jacob left, but even the strongest locks can rust with time." Meanwhile, at the Peterson Ranch, Eli worked under the relentless afternoon sun. His skin, already tanned by years of weathering, shone with the sweat of effort. Old Peterson watched him from the porch, chewing on a blade of grass. Never asked what brought you to Golden Valley, McRae, said the old man. "It's not a place where people come seeking fortune." Eli thrust the shovel into the ground and straightened up, adjusting his hat to protect his eyes from the sun. "I came to fulfill a promise," he replied simply. Peterson nodded without asking for more explanations. In the West, men were measured by their actions, not their words. That night, as the crescent moon illuminated his room with a silver light, Eli took a yellowed letter from his saddlebag, folded and unfolded so many times that the lines of the paper threatened to break. He read it for the umpteenth time, though he knew every word by heart. "Eli, my brother, if you're reading this, it's because I couldn't return. Protect them. Tell them I loved them until my last breath, and forgive me for asking you to carry my debts. The hat is yours now. May it protect you as it did me. Jacob." Eli folded the letter and put it away again. He took out his knife and a piece of wood he had been working on for days. By moonlight, he continued carving what would be his next gift for Clara, a small hat with a crescent moon engraved on the top. September arrived with its fresh breath, painting the leaves of trees ochre and crimson. Golden Valley prepared for the autumn fair, a tradition that brought together merchants, artisans, and musicians from all corners of the territory. Clara helped her mother prepare the breads and sweets they would sell at their stall. Her small hands worked with surprising precision for her age, forming dough figures that would later become cookies shaped like leaves and animals. "Mom, can I take some extra cookies?" she asked, while decorating a bison-shaped dough with small seeds. Martha looked at her curiously. "For whom, Clara?" "For a friend," she replied, without raising her eyes from her work. Martha smiled slightly. She knew her daughter didn't have many friends her age in town. The children found her strange, too dreamy, always, lost in invisible worlds. But lately something had changed in Clara. Her eyes shone with renewed purpose, and her drawings, once full of shadows and empty spaces, now overflowed with color and detail. "You can take as many as you want," she finally said. "You made them, after all." The day of the fair dawned clear and cool. The town transformed into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. Striped canvas tents rose like giant mushrooms, and the air filled with the aroma of melted caramel, freshly, baked bread, and pine wood. Martha and Clara set up their stall next to Grandma June's, who sold tinctures and natural remedies. Soon, the townspeople and visitors began to arrive, attracted by the aroma of Martha's sweet bread and Clara's famous cookies. In the middle of the afternoon, while her mother attended to some customers, Clara took a small basket with carefully selected cookies and slipped through the crowd. Her feet led her to the stable that had been set up for the horse exhibition. There, in a secluded corner, Eli McRae brushed a magnificent chestnut horse. Clara stopped a few yards away, suddenly shy. Eli looked up, and seeing her, a soft smile transformed his weathered face. "Mr. McRae," said Clara, approaching with the basket. "I brought you something." Eli put down the brush and crouched to be at the girl's height. His hat, the hat with the moon mark, cast a shadow over both of them, like a roof that protected them from the outside world. "Thank you, little Clara," he replied with a deep voice that sounded like water over stones. "I also have something for you." From his vest he took a small object wrapped in a discolored silk handkerchief. When she unwrapped it, Clara held her breath. It was a miniature carved in wood of a hat identical to the one Eli wore, with a tiny crescent moon engraved on the top. "So you never forget," he said, placing the small treasure in Clara's open palm. The girl looked at him with eyes full of questions she didn't dare to formulate. "Did you know my father?" she finally whispered, with a voice as fragile as a butterfly's wing. Eli briefly closed his eyes, as if the words physically pained him. "I knew him," he answered. Is a good man." Clara noticed the change in tense, and a spark of hope lit in her chest. Is he alive?" Before Eli could answer, a familiar voice cut through the air like a knife. "Clara Bell, what are you doing here?" Martha approached with large strides, her face contorted in an expression that Clara knew well, worry mixed with something deeper, something that seemed like fear. "I was just—" Clara began, but the words evaporated in her throat. Martha looked at Eli with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. Her eyes briefly stopped on the hat, and a flash of recognition crossed her face. "Mrs. Carter," greeted Eli, standing up and touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Your daughter brought me some cookies. They're delicious." Martha took Clara's hand firmly. "Thank you for watching over her, Mr. McRae, but we must return to the stall." As they walked away, Clara clutched in her hand the small wooden hat. She felt she had just lost the opportunity to discover something important, something that could change everything. But she also felt it was just the beginning, that the pieces of a larger puzzle were starting to move, seeking their place. October advanced with increasingly cold steps. Mornings dawned covered with a fine layer of frost that transformed the landscape into a crystal kingdom. Clara continued her silent exchange with Eli, leaving drawings and small treasures at the boundary between properties, and receiving in return carved figures and objects that seemed to tell stories without words. Martha observed her daughter with a mixture of concern and amazement. Clara had always been a special child, with a sensitivity that sometimes bordered on the supernatural. From a young age, she had shown a connection with the world around her that went beyond the ordinary, and now that connection seemed to have intensified, as if she had found a frequency that resonated perfectly with her inner being. One afternoon, while Clara was drawing by the window, Martha approached and sat beside her. "Why are you so interested in Mr. McRae, Clara?" she asked softly, trying to sound casual. Clara looked up from her drawing, a man on horseback under a starry sky. "Because he has something that belongs to us," she answered simply. "And because he's alone like us." Martha felt a lump in her throat. Sometimes her daughter's words hit her with unexpected force, reminding her how much Clara had lost with Jacob's disappearance. Not just a father, but the security of a complete world, of an intact family. "Do you think your father will return someday?" asked Martha, surprising herself with the question. Clara looked at her with her wise eyes, too ancient for her young face. "I don't know, Mum, but I think he has sent someone in his place." Before Martha could respond, a distant thunder rumbled, making the window panes vibrate. The sky, which had been clear until a few minutes ago, suddenly darkened, as if a giant hand had turned off the light of the sun. "A storm is coming," said Grandma June, entering the room with a bundle of dried herbs. "And it will be strong. We need to secure the windows and doors." During the following hours, the wind began to howl like a wounded animal, lashing the walls of the cabin with blind fury. The rain fell in dense curtains, turning the yard into a mud pit and the path into a furious river. Clara watched through the window, fascinated and terrified in equal parts by the spectacle of nature unleashed. The first leak appeared around midnight, when the storm was at its peak. Soon several more joined, forming small puddles on the wooden floor. Martha and June worked frantically, placing buckets and pots under the leaks, while Clara held an oil lamp that cast ghostly shadows on the walls. An ominous creak preceded the disaster. Part of the roof gave way under the weight of accumulated water, opening a hole through which rain freely entered. Water began to flood the main room, threatening to ruin the few pieces of furniture and belongings of the family. "We have to get out," shouted Grandma June over the roar of the storm. "The structure could collapse." Covering Clara with a blanket, Martha opened the door, facing the fury of the storm. The wind almost knocked her down, and the rain soaked them in seconds. The three advanced blindly in the darkness, heading towards Grandma June's small house, which seemed to be resisting the storm better. Halfway there, Clara stopped, pointing into the darkness. "Look!" she shouted. A figure approached, fighting against the wind. The light of a lightning bolt revealed his identity. It was Eli McRae, soaked to the bone, with his hat firmly secured to his head. "Mrs. Carter," he shouted upon seeing them. "I saw that part of..." "The roof collapsed. Come with me to the Petersons' barn. It's safer." Without waiting for a response, Eli took Clara in his arms and offered his arm to Martha for support. June followed them, surprisingly agile for her age. Together, like a strange, improvised family, they fought against the storm until they reached the Petersons' barn, a solid structure that stood like a beacon in the tempestuous night. Inside, warm and dry, several neighbors had already sought refuge. Eli led them to a corner, where he had prepared a sort of nest with hay bales and blankets. "Rest here," he said, taking off his soaked jacket and offering it to June. "I'll go see if I can save anything from your house." "It's too dangerous," Martha objected, grabbing him by the arm. "Wait until the storm subsides." Eli looked at her, and for a moment the world seemed to reduce to that silent exchange. His eyes, blue like a sky washed by rain, reflected a determination that Martha knew well, the same she had seen so many times in Jacob's eyes. "I promised someone I would protect you," he said quietly, just for her. "And a man is worth as much as his word." Before Martha could respond, Eli walked away, losing himself again in the stormy night. Clara, wrapped in a blanket and huddled next to her grandmother, observed the scene with a strange sensation of déjà vu, as if she had already seen this story unfold before, perhaps in a dream, or perhaps in another life. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of furious wind that tore off tiles and knocked down trees, of incessant rain that transformed paths into rivers and fields into swamps. When it finally ceased, Golden Valley emerged like a survivor of war, wounded but standing. Martha and Clara's house had suffered serious damage. Part of the roof had collapsed, the walls were soaked, and many of their belongings had been ruined. But not all was lost. During the storm, Eli had managed to rescue the most valuable items: the trunk with family, mementos, Clara's drawings, and the few letters that Jacob had sent before disappearing. The fourth day dawned clear and bright, as if the sky wanted to compensate for its previous fury. Martha, Clara, and June returned to their damaged home, accompanied by Eli and several neighbors who had offered to help with the reconstruction. "It's not as bad as it looks," said Eli, examining the damage with an expert eye. "The main structure is intact. With a few days of work, it will be as good as new." Martha looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. This man, this stranger, who had arrived from nowhere with Jacob's hat, behaved as if he had a personal debt to them, as if their well-being was his responsibility. During the following days, Eli led the reconstruction work. He arrived at dawn and left when the sun set, working tirelessly to repair the roof, reinforce the walls, and replace the damaged boards. Other men from town helped for a few hours, and then left to attend to their own affairs, but Eli remained constant as the stars. Clara watched him work, fascinated by the skill of his hands. Sometimes when he thought no one was watching, Eli would take off his hat and contemplate it with an indecipherable expression, running his fingers over the crescent moon mark with reverence, as if it were a sacred talisman. One afternoon, while Eli was repairing a window, Clara approached with a glass of lemonade that her grandmother had prepared. "Thank you, Mr. McRae," she said, offering him the drink. Eli wiped the sweat from his forehead and took the glass with a smile. "Call me Eli, little one," he replied, drinking eagerly. "Mr. McRae makes me feel old." Clara smiled, showing the small gap where she had lost a baby tooth. "My father was also good at fixing things," she commented, observing Eli's work. "He built this house with his own hands." Eli nodded, with a shadow crossing his face. "I know," he said softly. "He told me about it many times." Clara looked at him with wide eyes. "Were you friends?" "More than friends," Eli replied, returning to his work. "We were like brothers. We grew up together in Texas before he came here and met your mother." Clara sat on a nearby log, hugging her knees. "Why did he disappear?" she asked with the direct honesty of children. "Mom never tells me." Eli put down the hammer and sat beside her. He took off his hat and held it in his hands, as if seeking the right words in the texture of the worn leather. "Sometimes, Clara, men have to do difficult things to protect those they love," he finally said. "Your father found himself in a complicated situation. He had debts, dangerous people were looking for him. He thought that by distancing himself, he would also distance them from you." Clara assimilated the words in silence. It wasn't the first time she had heard talk of debts. She had caught fragments of conversations between her mother and Grandma June, worried whispers about borrowed money and men who came to collect. "Is he alive?" she asked, with a voice so small it was barely heard above the birdsong. Eli put his hat back on, adjusting it with a movement that Clara had seen in her dreams. "Yes," he answered simply, "and he has never stopped thinking about you." At that moment, Martha appeared at the door of the house with a basket of freshly washed clothes. Seeing Eli and Clara sitting together, an indecipherable expression crossed her face. Something between fear and hope, between rejection and longing. "Clara, come help me with the clothes," she called, with a voice that tried to sound casual, but betrayed her tension. Clara stood up, but before leaving, she touched Eli's arm. "If you see him," she whispered, "if you see my father, tell him I still have his harmonica, and that I play it every night so he knows where to find us." Eli nodded, with a lump in his throat that prevented him from responding. When Clara walked away, he took a folded handkerchief from his pocket and unfolded it carefully. Inside was a small metal object that gleamed in the sun, a harmonica identical to the one Clara kept as a treasure. November arrived with its mantle of gold and copper, dressing the trees of Golden Valley in colors that seemed extracted from a dream. The nights grew longer and colder, and the stars shone with a crystalline clarity in the clear sky. Martha and Clara's house was almost completely repaired, thanks to Eli's tireless work and the help of neighbors. In fact, it was better than before. The walls had been reinforced, the roof no longer leaked, and the new windows kept the heat in and the cold out. One morning, while Clara was having bread with honey for breakfast, Grandma June entered with exciting news. "This weekend is the Lantern Festival," she announced, with a special gleam in her ancient eyes. "The first since the war ended." Clara left her bread half-eaten. "The Lantern Festival?" she asked, intrigued. June sat beside her, with a creak of her tired bones. "It's an ancient tradition," she explained. "Each person writes a wish on a piece of paper, ties it to a small paper lantern, and releases it into the night sky. It's said that the wishes that fly highest are the ones that come true." Martha, who was knitting by the window, looked up with a nostalgic expression. "Your father and I met at a lantern festival," she said, with an unusual softness in her voice. "He wrote his wish, and I wrote mine." The lanterns rose, together, as if they were tied by an invisible thread. Clara observed her mother with fascination. It was rare for Martha to speak voluntarily of Jacob, and even rarer for her to do so with that dreamy expression on her face, as if for a moment she had forgotten the pain and betrayal. "What did you wish for, Mum?" asked Clara. Martha returned to her knitting with a small smile on her lips. "I can't tell you," she replied. "If you reveal your wish, it will never come true." The days before the festival were of intense preparation. The whole town participated in the making of paper lanterns, decorating the square with lanterns and colorful garlands. Clara spent hours designing her own lantern, painting it with figures of horses and stars. One afternoon, while working on her creation, Eli appeared at the back door of the house. Since the repairs had been completed, his visits had become less frequent, but they hadn't ceased completely. He always found an excuse to stop by: a forgotten tool, a beam that needed checking, a horse that Martha might want to buy. "Miss Clara," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat, "I brought you something for your lantern." From his pocket, he took a small bottle with golden paint, bright as liquid sun. "So your wish flies higher than any other," he said, with a smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost youthful. Clara took the bottle with reverence, as if it were the most precious of treasures. "Thank you, Eli," she replied, using his first name for the first time. "Will you come to the festival?" "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he assured. The night of the festival, Golden Valley transformed into a magical place. Hundreds of small lights illuminated the square, creating the illusion of a starry sky that had descended to earth. Music floated in the fresh November air, mixing with the laughter and conversations of the town's inhabitants. Martha, Clara, and Grandma June arrived when the celebration was at its peak. Clara carried her carefully decorated lantern, with golden stars and moons painted with the paint that Eli had given her. On a small piece of paper, she had written her wish in meticulous handwriting: "If my father cannot return, then may Mr. Eli never leave." Martha also carried a lantern, simpler but equally beautiful, with floral motifs in blue and violet tones. She hadn't shared with anyone what she had written on her paper, but her eyes, brighter and more alive than in the last 3 years, spoke of a heart that was beginning to awaken from a long winter. Eli was there near the center of the square, conversing with old Peterson. Upon seeing Clara and Martha, he excused himself and walked toward them, with his gait slightly tilted to the right, a sequela of some old injury. "Mrs. Carter, Miss Clara, Mrs. June," he greeted with a nod. "It's a perfect night for wishes to fly high." At midnight, the mayor gave the signal. One by one, the inhabitants of Golden Valley lit the candles inside their lanterns and released them to the night sky. Hundreds of small lights began to ascend, like stars returning to their celestial home. Clara observed how her lantern rose, turning gently in the night breeze. Beside it, Martha's rose in an almost parallel trajectory, and a little further away, Eli's, a red lantern with a pattern of concentric circles, followed them as if the three were connected by an invisible thread. "Look, Mom," whispered Clara, pointing to the sky. "Our lanterns are dancing together." Martha followed her daughter's gaze, and for a moment her face lit up with the same expression of childlike wonder as Clara's. Eli, standing beside them, contemplated the spectacle with a mixture of hope and melancholy. None of the three noticed Grandma June, who observed the scene from a few steps back, with a wise smile on her wrinkled face. Nor did they see how, with a discreet movement of her hand, she guided the wind so that the 3 lanterns rose together, higher than all the others, until they became small points of light indistinguishable from the stars. That night, while Clara slept deeply, Martha found the paper with her daughter's wish, forgotten on the table. She read it by candlelight, and something inside her, Something that had remained frozen for 3 long and lonely years began to melt like snow under the first sun of spring. December brought with it the first embrace of winter. Snow fell in soft and silent flakes, covering Golden Valley with an immaculate mantle that transformed the landscape into a vision of another world. The children of the town built snowmen and slid on improvised sleds down the nearby hills, while adults took refuge in the warmth of their homes, next to wood stoves and cups of hot chocolate. In Martha, Clara, and Grandma June's house, the atmosphere had subtly changed since the Lantern Festival. Martha smiled more often, and her eyes had recovered part of the brightness they had lost with Jacob's departure. Clara spent less time drawing her absent father, and more time learning to play the harmonica he had left her, and Grandma June observed these changes with the silent satisfaction of one who sees bloom the seeds she has patiently planted. Eli remained a constant presence in their lives. He no longer needed excuses to visit. He simply appeared with wood for the stove, or with a hunted rabbit for dinner, or simply to have a cup of coffee and listen to Clara play the harmonica. Sometimes he would take out his own, and together they created melodies that seemed to tell stories without words, stories of separation and reunion, of loss and hope. One particularly cold afternoon, while snow fell with renewed intensity, Eli arrived with a package wrapped in waxed paper. "It came on this morning's stagecoach," he explained, handing it to Martha. "It's from Tucson." Martha took the package with trembling hands. She couldn't remember the last time she had received correspondence from outside Golden Valley. Clara approached curious, while her mother carefully undid the wrapping. Inside was a sealed letter and an object wrapped in cloth. Martha opened the letter first, and her face paled upon recognizing the handwriting. Clara, observing over her mother's shoulder, also recognized it instantly. It was her father's handwriting. "My dear Martha, if you're reading this, it means that Eli has fulfilled his promise and that you and Clara are safe. I have no words to express my gratitude to him, nor to ask for your forgiveness for these years of absence. The debts that forced me to leave are finally settled. The men who threatened our family no longer represent a danger, but my return to Golden Valley now depends on one thing only: your will. Eli will explain everything to you. I have entrusted him with my complete story and also the gift that accompanies this letter. It's for Clara, though I know it won't compensate for the lost years. If you decide there is no place for me in your lives, I will understand. I have caused too much pain and perhaps it's too late to repair it, but if there is a possibility, however small, that you might allow me to try, I will be waiting at Esperanza Ranch, 3 days' journey from Golden Valley. With all my love, now and always, Jacob." Martha dropped the letter on the table and looked at Eli, who remained standing by the door with his hat in his hands. Her eyes demanded answers that her lips could not formulate. "Jacob and I grew up together in Texas," Eli began with a measured voice. "We were like brothers. When he met a young teacher from Canyon Springs, I knew he had found his soulmate. That was you, Martha." Martha sat down slowly, as if her legs could no longer support her. Clara remained at her side with a hand on her mother's shoulder, absorbing every word. "When Jacob settled here, I continued on my way, working on ranches, following rodeos. We wrote to each other frequently. He told me about his marriage, about Clara's birth, about the house he built with his own hands." Eli approached and sat across from Martha, with his hat still in his restless hands. 3 years ago, I received a desperate letter. Jacob had borrowed money to expand his blacksmith business, but the men to whom he owed were dangerous and had threatened to harm you if he didn't pay. Jacob decided to leave, to draw these men's attention away from Golden Valley. He asked me to come and watch over you, to protect you. He gave me his hat so you would recognize me, so you would know I came from him." Martha looked up with silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "Why didn't he tell us anything? Why didn't he allow me to decide?" "He feared you would insist on accompanying him, on facing the danger together," Eli replied, "and he couldn't risk you suffering the consequences of his mistakes." Clara, who had remained unusually quiet, took the cloth-wrapped object that had come with the letter. Upon unwrapping it, she found a small carved wooden box. When she opened it, a soft melody began to play. It was a music box with a small dancer who spun under a starry sky. "The melody," whispered Clara. "It's the same one Dad played on his harmonica." Martha observed her daughter, who contemplated the music box with a mixture of pain and wonder. Then she looked at Eli, who still held the hat with the moon mark between his hands, as if it were a sacred object that he should soon return to its rightful owner. "Did you know from the beginning?" Martha asked. "Since you arrived in Golden Valley?" Eli nodded. "Jacob wrote to me 6 months ago. The debts were settled, but he feared returning and finding that you had moved on without him. He asked me to come first, to see how you were, if there was space for him in your lives." Martha stood up and walked to the window. The snow continued to fall, covering the world with its mantle of silence and purity. Within her, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions struggled to find balance: the pain of betrayal, the relief of knowing Jacob was alive, gratitude toward Eli for his loyalty, uncertainty about the future. "What do you want to do, Mom?" asked Clara, with the music box still playing in her hands. Martha turned to her daughter and Eli with an expression that neither could decipher. "I need time," she replied. "I need to think." The following days were of intense inner conflict for Martha. While winter hardened its grip on Golden Valley, she walked through the house like a restless spirit, alternating between moments of deep contemplation and bursts of frantic activity. She baked bread that she then forgot to take out of the oven, started knitting scarves that she abandoned half-finished, began letters to Jacob that ended up crumpled in the fire. Clara observed her with concern, dividing her time between her mother, her grandmother, and Eli, who continued visiting them but maintained a respectful distance, aware of the tumult his revelation had unleashed. One night while Clara slept, Martha sat by the stove with Grandma June. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating the illusion that the room was alive, breathing to the rhythm of the fire. "I don't know what to do, Mum," Martha confessed, with a voice that seemed to come from far away. "Part of me wants to run to Jacob, tell him all is forgiven. Another part wants to close the door forever, protect the little I've managed to rebuild." June took her daughter's hands in hers, noting how time had changed them both. Hers, knotty and marked by age; Martha's, once soft, now calloused from work and suffering. "Love is not a straight path, my daughter," said the old woman. "It's a labyrinth of decisions, some easy, others impossible. Jacob chose what he believed was best to protect you. You must choose what is best to heal you." Martha looked toward the room where Clara slept, her breathing a soft counterpoint to the crackling of the fire. "And what about Eli?" she asked almost in a whisper. "He has been more than a friend to us, to Clara, and to me." June smiled with wisdom. "The human heart is larger than we believe, Martha. Sometimes it can harbor more than one type of love." The next day, while the snow offered a momentary truce, Martha made a decision. She dressed in her best dress, put on the shawl that Jacob had given her on their first anniversary, and walked to the Peterson ranch where Eli was staying. She found him in the stable, brushing a pinto horse with rhythmic and gentle movements. Seeing her, he stopped, surprised by her presence and by the change in her appearance. For the first time in years, Martha wore her hair loose, falling in waves over her shoulders. "Martha," he said simply, putting aside the brush. "I need you to take me to Jacob," she announced, with a firm voice that left no room for doubt. "I need to see him, to speak with him face to face. Only then can I decide." Eli looked at her. For a long time, searching in her eyes for some sign of doubt or fear, he found none, only a serene determination that reminded him why Jacob had fallen in love with her. "And Clara?" he asked. "She will stay with my mother," Martha replied. "I don't want her to get her hopes up or to suffer more disappointments. When I have spoken with Jacob, when I am sure, then we will decide together what to tell her." Eli nodded slowly. "We will leave tomorrow at dawn," he said. "I'll prepare the horses and provisions for 3 days of travel." That night, Martha sat by Clara's bed and watched her sleep. Her face, illuminated by the silver light of the moon that entered through the window, showed a peace that Martha envied. She gently caressed her daughter's hair, so similar to Jacob's, dark and slightly wavy, with copper highlights when the sun touched it. "I promise I will do what's right, my little star," she whispered, "whatever that may be." Before dawn, while the world still slept under its mantle of snow, Martha kissed Clara on the forehead and left a letter for her on the kitchen table. Then, bundled up to her ears and with a small bag of provisions, she went out to meet Eli at the agreed point. He was already there, with 2 horses saddled and ready for the journey. The animals' breath formed clouds of vapor in the cold air, and their hooves broke the silence as they struck the compacted snow. "Are you sure about this?" asked Eli, helping her mount. Martha nodded, adjusting, the reins in her gloved hands. More sure than of anything in a long time. And so, while the first ray of sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky with tones of pink and gold, Martha and Eli departed from Golden Valley, following the tracks of a past that refused to remain buried under the snow. Clara woke up hours later to find the house unusually silent. Grandma June prepared breakfast in the kitchen with slow but precise movements. On the table, next to a plate of corn pancakes, was a letter with her name written in her mother's elegant calligraphy. "My dear Clara, when you read this, I will have already left with Eli to see your father. I need to talk to him, to understand why he did what he did, and to decide what path we should take from now on. I know you would want to come with me, but this is a journey I must make alone. I promise that, whatever my decision, it will be thinking of what is best for you, for us, for our family. Grandma June will take care of you while I'm gone. Be good to her. Help her with the chores and practice your harmonica every day. I will return before you know it. With all my love, Mom." Clara read the letter twice, assimilating its content with a maturity improper for her age. Then she looked at her grandmother, who observed her with an expression between compassionate and expectant. "Mom has gone to see Dad," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. June nodded, pouring hot chocolate into a cup. "Your mother needs answers that only your father can give her," she explained, "and you need to be patient and trust her." Clara took the cup between her hands, absorbing its warmth. "Do you think they will return?" she asked, with a vulnerability that broke June's heart. "All 3. The old woman sat next to her granddaughter and took her hand. "The future is like a book with blank pages, my child," she replied. "Each day we write a new one, and sometimes, when we least expect it, the story takes a turn we never would have imagined." Clara nodded, tucking her mother's letter in the pocket of her dress, right over her heart. "Then I will wait," she said with determination. "And meanwhile I will practice my harmonica, so that when they return, I can play them the most beautiful song they have ever heard." The journey to Esperanza Ranch was arduous. 3 days of riding through rugged terrain, skirting canyons and crossing snow-covered plains. Martha and Eli rode in silence most of the time, each immersed in their own thoughts. At night they camped under the stars, sharing bitter coffee and conversations that extended until the fire reduced to embers. It was during one of those nights when Martha finally asked the question that had been circling her mind. "Eli," she said, while the flames cast dancing shadows on her face, "if Jacob is well, if his debts are settled, why didn't he return himself? Why send you?" Eli stirred the embers with a branch, contemplating how the sparks ascended toward the starry sky. "Fear," he finally replied, "the same fear that paralyzes us all at some point, that of discovering that what we love most no longer belongs to us." Martha remained silent, letting the words settle inside her like fresh snow. "And you?" she asked after a long moment. "Why did you agree to come? Why dedicate months of your life to fulfilling another man's promise?" Eli looked up, and by the light of the fire, Martha saw something in his eyes that made her hold her breath. A mixture of loyalty, devotion, and a deeper feeling that she didn't dare to name. "Because a man is worth as much as his word," he replied, "and because Jacob would do the same for me. In fact, he did once." On the morning of the 3rd day, crossing a hill covered with pines, they finally spotted Esperanza Ranch. It was smaller than Martha had imagined. A main wooden house with a wide porch, a stable, a corral for cattle, and a couple of minor buildings. The whole ensemble rested in a valley, protected by mountains, like a nest in the palm of a giant hand. As they approached, Martha felt her heart accelerate. 3 years of absence, of unanswered questions, of sleepless nights, all culminated in this moment. What would she say upon seeing Jacob? What would she feel? Love? Anger? Relief? Resentment? "I can go first if you want," Eli offered, perceiving her nervousness. "Let him know you're here." Martha shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "This is something I must do alone." Upon arriving at the ranch, a man came out to receive them. He was tall and thin, with grayish hair tied in a ponytail. He showed them where they could leave the horses and offered them fresh water. Martha asked for Jacob Carter, and the man pointed toward a nearby stream, where a solitary figure worked on what appeared to be a small stone construction. Martha dismounted and handed the reins to Eli. She breathed deeply, smoothed her dress in an unconscious gesture, and walked toward the stream. With each step, she felt as if time slowed down, as if the entire world held its breath in anticipation, and then she saw him, with his back to her, kneeling by the stream, working on what she now recognized as a small watermill. His hair was longer than she remembered, and there were new grey hairs mixed among the black. His shoulders, however, remained the same, strong, capable of carrying the weight of the world. "Jacob," she said, with a voice she barely recognized as her own. He remained motionless, as if he had heard a ghost. Slowly he stood up and turned toward her, his face weathered by the sun and marked by new lines that spoke of worries and regrets, transformed upon seeing her. Disbelief, joy, fear, hope, all in rapid succession. "Martha," he whispered, as if afraid that pronouncing her name aloud might make her disappear. They looked at each other across the 3 years that separated them, across the pain and distance, across the decisions made and the consequences lived. "Why?" was all Martha could ask, with a voice that contained as much pain as longing. Jacob briefly closed his eyes, as if gathering strength. When he opened them, Martha saw in them a sadness so deep it took her breath away. "To protect you," he replied. "The men to whom I owed money threatened to hurt you if I didn't pay. I couldn't risk them harming you. I thought if I left, if they pursued me, you would be safe. We could have faced it together," said Martha, with tears contained in her voice. "We are a family. Families stay together in difficult times." "I know," Jacob replied, taking a step closer. "I know now. But then, I was so afraid of losing you that I ended up losing you anyway." Martha felt how the tears, so long contained, began to flow freely down her cheeks. "Clara has missed you every day," she said. "She talks about you as if you were going to appear at any moment. She draws your face so as not to forget it. She plays the harmonica you left her, so that the music guides you back home." Jacob extended a trembling hand toward her, not daring to touch her. "And you, Martha?" he asked, with a vulnerability that disarmed her. "Have you missed me?" Martha looked toward the ranch, where Eli patiently waited, respecting their space. She thought of the months since his arrival, how his presence had brought a strange mixture of comfort and confusion to her life. She thought of the hat with the moon mark, of the stories shared by the fire, of the small gestures that had begun to rebuild her faith in men, in the future. Then she looked at Jacob, at the man she had loved since she was a young teacher in Canyon Springs, at the father of her daughter, at the builder of the house that had been their home. "Every day," she finally replied, with an honesty that surprised even herself. "I have missed you and I have hated you. I have looked for you in Clara's face and I have cursed you in the solitude of our empty bed." Jacob nodded, accepting her words as the just sentence they were. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, "only that you understand me, and perhaps, with time, that you allow me to try to repair what I broke." Martha took a step toward him, reducing the physical distance that was only a pale reflection of the emotional distance that still separated them. "I don't know if I can," she confessed. "I don't know if we can go back to being what we were." "I don't want us to go back to being what we were," Jacob replied. "I want us to be what we can become. Something new, something built on the foundations of what we have learned, of what we have suffered." Martha looked again to where Eli waited, and a sudden understanding pierced her like lightning. It wasn't just a decision between forgiving Jacob or not, between returning or not to the life they had had. It was a much more complex crossroads, involving not only her heart, but also Clara's, Jacob's, and Eli's. "I need time," she finally said. "We need time. All of us." Jacob nodded with a mixture of acceptance and hope in his gaze. "Time is the only thing I have to offer now," he replied. "That, and the promise that whatever your decision, I will respect it." And so, under the infinite sky of the west, with the sound of the stream as the only witness, Martha and Jacob began the long and difficult path toward understanding, if not toward reconciliation. While Martha faced her own demons at Esperanza Ranch, Clara dealt with her mother's absence and uncertainty in Golden Valley. The days passed with exasperating slowness, each dawn bringing the hope of a return, each dusk taking a little of that hope with it. Grandma June kept Clara busy with chores and lessons. She taught her to read the stars, to identify medicinal plants, to predict the weather by the behavior of animals. In the afternoons, Clara practiced the harmonica, sitting on the front porch, sending melancholy notes to the wind, like messages in bottles launched into an invisible ocean. "Do you think Mom will bring Dad back?" asked Clara one night, while she and her grandmother knitted blankets for the winter. June measured her words carefully, like one measuring ingredients for medicine. "I don't know, little one," she replied with honesty, "but I think your mother will bring with her a decision, and that decision will be the right one, even if it's not the one we expect." Clara nodded, processing the words with a maturity that sometimes frightened June. "And Mr. Eli, will he return with them?" she asked after a moment. June looked at her granddaughter with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Children, she thought again, see things that adults pretend to ignore. "Would you like him to return?" she asked in response. Clara put her knitting on her lap and looked toward the window, where snow fell softly, covering the world with its silent mantle. "Yes," she replied, "I would like all three to return, Dad, Mom, and Mr. Eli. Sometimes, Clara, life offers us paths we never imagined, paths that seem impossible until we begin to walk them." 5 days after Martha's departure, while Clara was drawing by the window, a movement on the path caught her attention. 3 riders approached through the snow, their figures silhouetted against the pale winter sky. Clara dropped her notebook and ran to the door. "Grandma!" she shouted. "3 people are coming on horseback!" June joined her on the porch, squinting to distinguish the visitors. As they approached, their identities were revealed. Eli rode at the front, followed by Martha, and bringing up the rear, a man June hadn't seen in 3 years but would recognize anywhere: Jacob Carter. Clara held her breath, her small body tense like a bowstring. When the riders reached the yard and dismounted, she remained paralyzed, unable to move, to speak, even to breathe. Jacob advanced slowly toward her with an expression that mixed love, fear, and hope. He stopped a few steps away, as if an invisible barrier prevented him from coming closer. "Clara," he said with a voice broken by emotion, "my little star." Clara stared at him, studying every detail of his face. The new wrinkles around his eyes, the beard speckled with grey, the scar on his right cheek that wasn't there before. She compared this real face, alive, changed by time, with the one she had kept in her memory and in her drawings for 3 long years. "Dad," she finally whispered, and in that single word were 1,000 questions, 1,000 reproaches, 1,000 yearnings. Jacob knelt in the snow, coming to his daughter's height. He extended a hand toward her, but didn't touch her, respecting the distance Clara needed to maintain. "I've returned," he said simply. "If you allow me, I would like to stay. But the decision is yours, Clara, yours alone." Clara looked at her mother, who observed the scene with eyes bright with contained tears. Then at Eli, who remained a bit apart, with his hat in his hands, the hat with the moon mark that had initiated this whole story. And finally at her grandmother June, who nodded slightly as if telling her to trust her heart. Clara took a step forward, then another, and another, until she stood before her father. She raised a small hand and touched his cheek, as if to make sure he was real, that he wouldn't disappear as in so many of her dreams. "You said you would return," she murmured. "You promised the night before you left. You said you would return when the stars were aligned." Jacob nodded, with tears rolling freely down his cheeks. "And here I am," he replied, "because you, Clara, are my star, the only one I need to find my way home." Clara then threw herself into his arms, with a sob that seemed to release 3 years of contained hope. Jacob held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, murmuring words of love and promises that this time he was determined to keep. Martha approached slowly, and Jacob extended an arm toward her, inviting her to join the embrace. With some hesitation, Martha knelt beside them, and for a moment the 3 formed a perfect circle, a universe of their own amid the snow. When they finally separated, Clara looked beyond her parents to where Eli remained, observing the scene with a mixture of joy and resignation. "Mr. Eli," called Clara, "you are also part of this. You must stay too." Eli looked at Martha and Jacob, uncertain. Jacob was the first to speak. "My daughter is right, brother," he said, standing up and extending a hand toward Eli. "We wouldn't have gotten here without you, and we can't continue without you either." Martha nodded, with an expression that spoke of long and difficult conversations, of decisions made and paths chosen. "There is room in Golden Valley for all of us," she said, "in different ways but equally important." Eli stepped forward, taking the hand Jacob offered him. Clara approached and took Eli's free hand, completing a new circle, one larger and more complex than the previous one. Grandma June observed from the porch with a smile that spoke of ancestral wisdom and the certainty that sometimes families come in forms that defy conventions but are no less real, no less necessary. "I think," said Clara, looking at the three adults who now formed part of her world, "that we will need a bigger house." And for the first time in 3 years, the sound of Martha's sincere laughter floated in the cold winter air, mixing with that of Jacob, Eli, and Clara, creating a melody that promised new beginnings and infinite possibilities. Spring arrived in Golden Valley with an explosion of color and life, the fields covered with wildflowers, the trees dressed in tender green, and the birds returned to fill the air with their songs. It was as if nature celebrated the changes that had occurred in Clara's life and her family's. Jacob had settled in the small adjacent house that Grandma June had previously occupied, who now shared the main house with Martha and Clara. Eli, for his part, had bought a nearby plot and begun to build his own cabin, although he spent more time at the Carter's home than on his property. Jacob's reintegration into the community hadn't been easy. Some received him with open arms, happy to see an old friend return. Others, more wary, kept their distance, murmuring about men who abandon their responsibilities. But Jacob faced each day with humility and determination, working hard to rebuild not only his reputation, but also the trust of those he had hurt with his departure. He had reopened the blacksmith shop, and his skills, which had only improved during his absence, soon attracted customers from neighboring towns. Martha continued with her bread and sewing business, now with occasional help from Jacob, who had discovered an unexpected talent for baking. And Eli divided his time between helping at the Peterson Ranch, working on his own cabin, and teaching Clara to ride and care for the horse he had given her, a young chestnut mare that Clara had named Esperanza. The relationship between the three adults was complex but functional. Jacob and Eli maintained their old friendship, strengthened by the years and shared trials. Martha and Jacob advanced slowly toward a new form of understanding, based not on what they had been, but on what they could become. And between Martha and Eli there existed a special bond, a deep respect and an affection that everyone recognized but no one named. Clara observed these changes with the mixture of curiosity and acceptance characteristic of children. For her, the important thing was that her family was complete again, albeit in a form she never would have imagined. One afternoon, while Clara practiced with her harmonica on the porch, Jacob sat beside her with his own. Together they improvised a melody that spoke of separation and reunion, of loss and rediscovery. "You do it very well," said Jacob when they finished. "You have a gift for music." Clara smiled, putting her harmonica in the pocket of her dress. "Mr. Eli says I inherited your ear," she replied, "and Mom says I inherited your stubbornness." Jacob laughed, a sound that had become more frequent with the passing weeks. "They're both right," he admitted, "though I prefer to call it determination." They remained silent for a moment, contemplating the sunset that painted the sky with tones of orange and purple. "Dad," Clara finally said, "are you happy here?" Jacob looked at his daughter, surprised by the depth of the question. "Yes," he replied after a moment, "not in the same way as before, but perhaps in a truer form." "And you, little star, are you happy?" Clara nodded enthusiastically. "I have Mom, I have you, I have Grandma June and Mr. Eli. I have Esperanza," she said, referring to her mare. "And I have music. How could I not be happy?" Jacob smiled, marveled by the wisdom and simplicity with which his daughter saw the world. At that moment, Martha came out to the porch, drying her hands on her apron. "Dinner is ready," she announced. "Eli and your mother are already at the table." Jacob and Clara got up and followed Martha into the house, where the aroma of stew and freshly baked bread created an atmosphere of warmth and home. Dinner passed amid conversations and laughter. June told stories of when Martha was a child, making her blush and the others laugh. Eli related his adventures in distant territories, captivating Clara with descriptions of infinite deserts and mountains that touched the sky. Jacob talked about new projects for the blacksmith shop, about how he planned to expand it to include a carpentry section. As she observed them, Clara felt a fullness she hadn't experienced in years. Her family, fractured and dispersed for so long, was now reunited under the same roof, sharing not only bread and wine, but also hopes, dreams and plans for a future that for the first time in a long time seemed bright and promising. After dinner, while the adults conversed in the living room, Clara went up to her room and took out from under her bed a carved wooden box, a gift from Eli. Inside she kept her most precious treasures: drawings, curiously shaped stones, colored feathers, and the small wooden hat with the moon mark that Eli had given her months ago. She took the hat in her hands, feeling its weight and texture. Then, with determination, she placed it on her nightstand, where the moonlight illuminated it, projecting a shadow that seemed to dance on the wall. She no longer needed to hide her treasures or her memories. She no longer needed to draw faces so as not to forget them. The people she loved were there, real and present, and the future, though uncertain as always, extended before her like a path illuminated by the stars. Summer arrived with its intense heat and endless days. Golden Valley buzzed with activity, the fields filled with workers harvesting crops. Children ran free without the obligation of school, and nights lengthened with bonfires and music under the starry sky. At the Carter home, preparations for the Riders' Festival were in full swing. This year would be special. Jacob would participate in the blacksmithing competition, Martha would present her breads and pastries at her own stall, and Eli had registered Clara in the children's riding category, where she would show what she had learned with Esperanza. Grandma June observed these preparations with the satisfaction of one who sees a long-awaited prophecy fulfilled. Seated in her rocking chair on the porch, with her wrinkled hands resting on a cane carved by Eli, she contemplated the comings and goings of her family with eyes that had seen too many winters but hadn't lost their shine. "What are you thinking about, Grandma?" asked Clara, sitting at her feet with a glass of fresh lemonade. June smiled, caressing her granddaughter's hair with a trembling but still strong hand. "I'm thinking about circles, my child," she replied. "About how life takes us far away only to bring us back, transformed but recognizable." Clara nodded as if she perfectly understood the metaphor. "Like Dad," she said. "He left, but he came back." "And like the hat," added June, pointing to the yard where Jacob and Eli worked together on a new project. A swing for Clara. "Your father's hat traveled on Eli's head only to return to its rightful owner." Indeed, Jacob wore his hat with the moon mark again. Eli now wore a new one, without marks or stories, ready to accumulate its own adventures and memories. The day of the festival dawned clear and hot. The entire town had dressed up for the occasion. Colorful pennants crossed the streets, food and craft stalls formed a festive labyrinth in the central square, and the aroma of roasted meat and sweets mixed with the music of violins and guitars. Clara rode proudly on Esperanza, dressed in a riding outfit that Martha had specially made for the occasion. Jacob walked beside her, holding the reins, until they reached the competition area. Eli followed them, carrying the riding equipment and a small bag with water and provisions. Martha and June already waited for them at the venue, saving places in the stands from where they could see all the competitions. Seeing them approach, Martha felt a wave of gratitude and amazement. If someone had told her a year ago that her family would be like this today, complete, united, happy, she wouldn't have believed it possible. The children's riding competition was the first of the day. Clara, the smallest of the participants, surprised everyone with her skill and confidence on Esperanza. Together, girl and mare demonstrated a connection that went beyond training. It was a communion of spirits, a mutual understanding that made even the most experienced riders nod with approval. When Clara completed her course, with her father's hat, too big for her head but secured with a ribbon, firmly in place, an ovation rose from the stands. Jacob, Martha, Eli and June applauded with more enthusiasm than anyone, their faces illuminated by pride and joy. Clara dismounted with the grace of one born to be on a horse and ran toward her family, with cheeks flushed from excitement and effort. "We did it!" she exclaimed, hugging first her mother, then her father, Eli, and finally her grandmother. "Esperanza and I did it." "You did wonderfully," confirmed Jacob, lifting her in his arms. "I'm so proud of you, my little star." Later, when the competitions gave way to the fair and dances, the Carter family gathered for a picnic under the great oak that dominated the southern end of the square. Martha spread a checkered tablecloth on the grass and set upon it a feast: freshly baked bread, fresh cheese, smoked ham, apple pie, and fresh lemonade. As they ate and conversed, laughing at the day's anecdotes, Clara noticed something curious. At some point, without anyone noticing, they had formed a perfect circle. Jacob to Martha's right, Eli to her left, Grandma June completing the arc, and she, Clara, at the center of it all. It was an image that perfectly captured what they had become. Not a traditional family, not an arrangement that could be easily explained or that others could understand, but a circle of love and loyalty, of forgiveness and second beginnings, of shared pasts and intertwined futures. As the sun began to set, tinting the sky with golden and rosy tones, Clara took out her harmonica and began to play. Jacob accompanied her with his, and soon their melodies rose toward the sky, intertwining as their lives had done. Martha observed her daughter and her daughter's father, feeling a peace she had believed impossible after so much pain. Eli, seated beside her, discreetly took her hand, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning, and Grandma June, the wisest of all, closed her eyes and smiled, listening not only to the music, but also to the invisible but powerful sound of a circle that had finally been completed. That night, as they returned home under a sky studded with stars, Clara rode on Esperanza between Jacob and Eli, with Martha and June following them in a small cart. The hat with the moon mark, now returned to Jacob, gleamed under the silver light, like a symbol of all that was lost and recovered, of all that was broken and repaired, of all the endings that are, in reality, new beginnings. And so, amid dust, scars, and fulfilled promises, the old hat, passed from hand to hand, had fulfilled its mission, to reunite what time had tried to separate. But more than that, it had been the catalyst for something new and beautiful, something none of them would have imagined possible: a redefined family, an expanded love, a home that wasn't limited to the walls of a house, but existed in the sacred space between their hearts. Clara Bell, the girl who had once recognized her father's hat on a stranger's head, now rode under the stars, surrounded by the love of not one, but many hearts. And in that moment, under the infinite sky of the West, she knew with the certainty that only children possess, that some journeys never end, that some stories continue to be written long after we believe they have ended, and that sometimes, just sometimes, getting lost is the only way to find a path home that we never would have discovered otherwise.